Okay, so welcome to the Third Testament Foundation live stream. Uh, Today we're going to talk about humility, and for those of you who want the short version, here's a definition of humility. According to Martinez, it's humility is you know that you don't know anything. So if that's all you have time for today, then now we know what humility is. You know, if you know that you don't know anything, then you're humble enough. You don't need this. But anyway, we're gonna read a little bit about the from the book, some excerpt, "The Road to Initiation," um, from the Third Testament. And before we do that, let's just get into a little bit of an introduction to humility and intuition, because basically you need humility before you can activate your intuition body. And as always, the symbols are copyright of Martinez Institute. So we see here in the main symbol that there are 6 colors, and each color represents a life zone in the spiral cycle, and the 3 bottom ones are material life zones or realms, dimensions, and the 3 top ones are the spiritual realms, or spiritual dimensions. And we have here in symbolized by orange the animal kingdom, and if we zoom in we can see that there is a planet there, and it's going towards the star, this little 5-pointed star. What that means is once this planet, in this case this planet Earth, reaches the star, it goes into the real human kingdom. And what we talked about last time was that it means that we have our intuition body activated. All right. So the intuition energy is the blue, symbolized by the blue in the symbol. So we can't see the blue right here, but that is because this symbol has a little more detail. So right here is kind of like an X-ray. Oops, X-ray of the symbol, and so the star would be right here. In evolution, we see again how the orange tapers off, which means that the animal kingdom has been outlived, or we're satiated, we're full, no longer hungry for the killing principle, or the law of every man for himself, the law of taking, that is the law of the animal kingdom, but we're hungry for the law of giving, the law of the real human kingdom. And the gateway to this kingdom is this star, which should be right here, yeah. And we see how this latent blue here, intuition, and now in the real human kingdom is in its first increasing stage, right? So that is what this birth signifies. It means that the intuition body has been born from its latent state here to its first increasing state here. So and we talked in depth about this in the last live stream. So to keep it brief, in here in this live stream we're going to talk about the great birth here, and what can we do to facilitate this great birth. Basically, Martinez writes in The Road to Initiation that we need humility and love, but actually humility is love. You can't have love without humility, because that's not really love. So we need this humility. And what is this humility? And we're going to read about what humility is and what it is not. And this is very important if we want to facilitate our journey into the real human kingdom, out of darkness into the light. So of course the darkness is the animal kingdom, the killing principle, and the light is the real human kingdom, the kingdom of love, neighborly love and compassion. Yeah. So with that in mind, uh, we'll go over to the reading and see what we can get out of that. Let me just see. Okay, excuse me. There we go. So I have chosen to highlight a few of the chapters because it's too long to read the whole article, even though it's not that long. It's a short book. It was written in 1953 by Martinez, and he calls it The Road to Initiation. So in initiation, again, here is the great birth, or where they're symbolized by the star, and that means that how do we get to the star? So this is very important. So how do we get to the star? Okay, the great birth, it is this activation of the intuition body. Okay, so of course 1953, it's been around for a while, but I doubt that it's on the bestseller list. Should be, but I guess eventually, as people wake up, more and more people are going to pick this book up. It's a very good introductory book, and there's links down below if you want to just read it on your own. You can get the ebook or you can get a printed book. So there's links to both of them, and it's a nice little pocket-sized book to have, with you, and a good introduction to the Third Testament. So we're gonna just read a few of the chapters here today. Shouldn't take too long, maybe half hour or so. Daily life on earth is a divine fairy tale. The road to the organic initiation, which I in Livets Bog, the Book of Life, have called the Great Birth, can be summed up in one word: humility. Humility is not an inferiority complex born of a slavish mentality that is subservient to other people, but is, on the other hand, the same as a pure, real, and absolutely normal perception of one's own imperfection or mental limitation. With such true knowledge of oneself, one's consciousness opens, and thereby also one's respect and veneration towards all real perfection in whom and wherever it may appear. One is automatically attuned to the most perfect way of one's own further evolution towards the eternal light. Humility can therefore be expressed as the key to the gate of wisdom. The gate of wisdom will here be understood as initiation, the great birth, which in turn is the same as cosmic clear-sightedness. All human beings are on the road to this gate of wisdom. In other words, this means that even daily earthly life is actually a great fairy tale. This fairy tale differs from all other fairy tales in that it is not, like them, merely a poem, a fable, an artistically staged performance, but the realistic truth. This fairy tale is a revelation of a humanity that is traveling forwards and upwards towards a radiant experience, a divine salvation from sorrow and suffering, a meeting with the Godhead himself. Again, this meeting with the Godhead himself that, like we talked about in the last live stream, is when you activate your intuition body, then you gain the ability to see God. So Again, we're always one with God, but we're not always conscious that we're one with God. But when we activate our intuition body, we become conscious that we are in fact one with God, and that is how we see God. It's just a meeting with God himself, right? The experience of oneness with God. A journey in the dark. This journey goes over continents and seas, through barren deserts and ice-cold polar regions, over frozen tundras and swamps, over rivers, lakes, and brooks, through luxuriant flowering meadows, gardens, fields, and forests, up craggy rocks and mountainsides, and down through deep dark abysses with cold mudholes, slimy vermin, and poisonous fumes, through swelteringly hot, fever-inducing country with thick undergrowth filled with all kinds of dangerous wild animals such as tigers, snakes, crocodiles, and insects. But we have not yet reached the end of the road. There are still strange, vast areas to cross before we reach the gate of wisdom. We have thus to go through dreadful dark zones of death, where the living beings can maintain their existence only by murdering other beings. And we go through other zones where the poisonous flames of hatred cause the living beings to lie, slander, murder, and kill each other, not because it is a condition of life to kill, as it is among the animals, but only in order to conquer each other's advantageous place and progress in the great journey. Over battlefields with deadly tanks, the thundering of cannons, the snarling of machine guns and bombers, which make God's bright sky the last refuge of the fading eyes of the dying, dangerous to look at, goes the eternal road. Ever onward, the road continues over stinking corpses, over the ruins of great towns, over vast soldiers' graves, overcrowded hospitals, poor and hungry populations tortured by epidemics, periods of scarcity, robbery, and plundering. And from air shelters, cellars, and caves, people cry towards the sky, which they themselves have poisoned, and therefore do not dare to look at, for the one and only great thing, namely peace. Nothing else matters to them. Arrogance and humility. This immensely long journey through an unending chain of lives and sorrow and suffering, pain and mutilation had thus not been in vain. It had brought us a kind of knowledge, albeit quite a different kind to the one we had expected. It had shown us that at present we have not the greatness or capacity in knowledge and spirit, creation and exercise of will that we had imagined, and therefore boasted of. As boasting is in turn the same as arrogance, our journey through life led us thus to the fall of this arrogance. But where arrogance is removed from the consciousness, normally only humility is left. As we will here understand, humility is thus at first only an understanding of one's inferiority. Humility is not, as some people think, an expression of a worshipping, groveling, slave-like nature that blindly submits itself to tyranny or abuse. Such a nature is not humility, but on the contrary the same as a training produced by fear of brutality and terror. Or this training could also be an association produced by fear of brutality and terror. Such a state has naturally nothing to do with the great solution or aim of life in the form of absolute self-knowledge, which was the goal of one's journey through life's many labyrinths, sufferings, and difficulties, or special structure. So here he tells us what humility is. It's the lack of arrogance, right? And what humility, what is it not? It's not this worshipping, groveling, slave-like nature that blindly submits itself to tyranny or abuse, right? So it's not just taking it. There's a method to the madness here. So if we just do that, he says it's the same as a training produced by fear of brutality and terror, right? So this is like what humility is not. It's not just taking it, just say yes, I'll do it and stuff, and never standing up for yourself in the face of tyranny. That's not humility, right? That's just a training produced by fear of brutality and terror, right? So imagine social rank and the emperor's new clothes. The purely social upper class and lower class are thus based solely on and supported solely by arrogance, or the erroneous belief that the difference in the amount of material assets one possesses is the same as a real, natural, and thereby cosmic class difference between the individuals, and that it gives the upper class the right to rule and exploit the lower class. As we see here, it was real cosmic clear-sightedness that caused the Savior to pronounce his realization of the fact that it was impossible for the rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It is not strange that the wise men of the world recommend humility as the only absolute way to God, for humility is the only attitude of consciousness that can prevent the individual from succumbing to artificial superiority or imagined grandeur. Only humility can free the terrestrial human being from going around in nothing but a shirt, like the Imperial in Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale, being ridiculed by everyone because he imagined that he was walking around in his in the world's finest clothes. A better picture of the emptiness and hollowness of arrogance and vanity than this divine fairy tale can hardly be imagined. The imagined grandeur or social rank that is the very nature of arrogance cannot in the long run be maintained in the face of absolute reality. Those in one's surroundings are not deluded in quite the same way, and will sooner or later unveil the true nakedness of the individual. Only through humility, which is actually the same as the individual's real perception of his mental nakedness or real spiritual standard, can he protect himself from the dangers of walking around naked, which arrogance and vanity in themselves are, and which the emperor in the fairy tale succumbed to. Yeah. When primitive vanity ultimately gives rise to humility in the arrogant mind. Why do human beings become unnaturally vain? Indeed, is it not exactly as we have mentioned previously? Their longing for admiration, their longing for people to think that they are people of rank who belong to the upper class. That is the cause of this form of energy that is manifested as vanity. Is it not so that people wish to indicate that they belong to a higher cultural stage than others? And with this unloving attitude towards their fellow beings, or with this excessive desire to shine with a higher cultural stage, people industriously sew the new clothes that in the fairy tale are nothing but the emperor's shirt. People create or acquire the most extreme and extravagant fashion, and they walk proudly along the roads and lanes in nothing but their shirt, enjoying the higher cultural stage that they with their modern appearance believe they represent. And it is just this imagination or mental attitude that constitutes arrogance, and that sooner or later must fall. The presence of this hidden arrogance, the belief that one is superior to others, offends the surroundings, so that the representatives of these extreme views are despised by their fellow beings and given a hard time by them. These fellow beings can, albeit unconsciously, mentally feel the extravagant being's complacency about their imagined greatness and the hollowness and emptiness that sometimes hide behind their outer, at times large-scale, modern refinement. And one day, these fellow beings will cause the delusion of greatness or high rank to shatter, thus filling the prodigal son's consciousness with the recognition of his cultural nakedness, this recognition being the same as humility. And the prodigal son subsequently turns his gaze towards the creation of real culture, or his sense for humaneness. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Here one may perhaps raise the objection that these previously mentioned phenomena are quite innocent. And it is of course natural that it cannot in itself be a crime to dress in one way or another or to act the millionaire, just as having this equipment is not a crime either, regardless of whether it is one's own property that has been paid for in cash or in installments, or one has merely borrowed it. It is not the things or the actual use of the things that are in conflict with humane laws. Evolution must imply that beings subdue matter more and more, and it can be nothing less than divine that all things used by human beings should become increasingly refined and technically and artistically perfect. It is only where the use of these phenomena is purely a result of vanity that things are turned into a means with which one can induce an artificial satisfaction of one's desire to erect an appropriate boundary between one's own step in evolution and one's neighbor's, thus demonstrating one's loftiness or grandeur as conspicuously and vociferously as possible for one's surroundings. Servants, therefore, have to be dressed in livery or special servants' uniforms so that their subordinate position can be made clear, so that visitors will not make the mistakes of raising their hats for the servants instead of for the master. Where there's no outward glitter, people greet and admire the purely human aspect. And then it may happen that the greeting may be more in favor of the servant than in favor of the master. The surroundings unveil the cosmic truth that no one has to come to the world to be served. This is kind of important, yeah. The surroundings unveil the cosmic truth that no one has to come to the world to be served. The surroundings therefore recognize themselves in the servant, while in the master they see something alien, something unknown or abnormal. And it is this eternal natural law that takes down all arrogance and thereby all artificial and self-appointed grandeur. It is exclusively these surroundings that dictate. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So this is like we're here to serve, not to be served, right? Which is the same as we're here to give and not to take. And that means we're here to be in the real human kingdom, yeah? And not in the animal kingdom. Because the law of the animal kingdom is taking, and the law of the real human kingdom is giving unconditionally. So here, how one comes into contact with evolution and real life by recognizing one's imperfection. As previously mentioned, it is not insensitivity, boasting, or and arrogance, or the worship of a camouflaged or false stage in evolution that we long to find in our neighbor. So this is basically when we try to be more than we are, we try holding up this mask of we're actually better than we are. Always trying to outnumber, like it's a competitive element to it, right? So what is it really? We're trying to camouflage a false stage in evolution. So we're actually trying to pretend that we are more evolved than we actually are. And that's not humility, right? That's arrogance. So let's just start from the beginning again. Get rid of that. Oh, there it is. So, as previously mentioned, it is not insensitivity, boasting, and arrogance, or the worship of a camouflaged or false stage in evolution that we long to find in our neighbor. It is exclusively love. It is love that is the same. It is love that is the great and profound aim behind every terrestrial human quest. But love cannot exist without being the same as humility. And as previously mentioned, humility is the same as the absolute recognition of the perfection and imperfection of one's own being. This self-knowledge in turn being the same as the absolutely true recognition of the living being. If one recognizes one's own perfection, one becomes respectful towards all those who have reached a level of perfection that is above one's own. One comes to love them as ideals and examples for one's own endeavors towards perfection, thereby unlocking these beings' energy, delight, and joy by having us as proselytes, they're like followers, pupils, and co-workers. We have connected ourselves to evolution's own great source of energy and are carried forwards and upwards by it towards the highest pinnacles of mentality and life. Yeah, I like this one, right? But love cannot exist without being the same as humility. Last one here. What we call humility. If we recognize our own perfection, we will thereby know that it does not constitute any kind of preferential treatment or favoring of us by providence or the Godhead, regardless of how much this same perfection nevertheless may sparkle and shine with creativity and high intellectuality. If this recognition of our own perfection is real and absolute, We will thus realize that it is only a question of time until others will pass through the same stage as the one that we have reached, just as it will also only be a question of time until we ourselves shall pass through the more perfect stages above our stage, which others have already passed. This perfect and absolute self-knowledge thus prevents us from getting even the slightest basis or support for the feeling of being higher or more favored by life, providence, or the Godhead than other beings. It thus leaves nothing whatsoever in us that can give rise to us pharisaical worshipping ourselves, so that is like falsely worshipping ourselves because of our own particular stage in evolution, and our ensuing contempt for those who have not yet reached the same stage as we have. And it is this stage of consciousness, totally cleansed of the stimulus to worship oneself, that we call humility. Right. So now we have some definitions of humility according to Martinez. Totally cleansed, right, of the desire to worship ourselves, or desire to promote ourselves, right? So, and that's because what is it that we do when we promote ourselves and are basically worshiping ourselves? That is that we're taking, right? We're taking because we're promoting ourselves. And what happens when we stop worshiping ourselves and we start giving, right? Because you start being someone, you start serving your fellow beings, your fellow man, and your neighbors, and your friends and family. Yeah. So I think we're gonna call it quits here, and if you are interested in sending some questions, you can do that on email, or you can send a text to this number, 1-941-462-3177. If there's some questions you have about the talk, or you want to have a certain topic talked about and illustrated in the perspective of the Third Testament terminology, then you're welcome to text or email or call. You can also call, leave a message. And I don't know if anybody's on a call now. Let's see, because then we can, I don't know, call in. So I think we'll just call it a day, and see you soon.